Apartment number 44. Part 1. A New Beginning. Alex moved to this city to start a new life. He managed to get into university, and now he was looking for a place to live. His budget was limited, so he had to settle for what was available. That's why an advertisement for renting an apartment at an incredibly low price seemed like a real stroke of luck to him. Rent a one-room apartment, furnished. Payment required for the first and last months up front, no intermediaries. He immediately called the number provided. The landlord, a man with a hoarse voice, spoke briefly and emotionlessly. "If the apartment suits you, send the money to the card. The key is in the mailbox." Alex was surprised. It sounded suspicious, but he didn't want to miss the chance. He agreed. The next day, the guy arrived at the specified address. It was an old 5-story building from the Soviet era. The entrance door to the stairwell was barely hanging on its hinges, and the walls were covered with cracks and graffiti. As he climbed the stairs, Alex noticed that the stairwell was eerily quiet. No TV noise, no voices of neighbors, no sound of the elevator. In the mailbox, there really was a key. He unlocked apartment number 44 and stepped inside. The apartment was normal. An old sofa, a worn wardrobe, a kitchen with peeling tiles. Nothing strange, just a neglected place that clearly hadn't been renovated in a long time. But the most important thing, there was nothing eerie here, as he had feared. Alex unpacked his things, checked the faucet in the bathroom. The water ran, although with a yellowish tint. He even laughed at himself. What was he afraid of? It was just an apartment, nothing more. The first oddities. The first 2 days passed without incident. Alex went to classes, returned to the apartment in the evening, and watched movies on his laptop. But on the third night, he was awakened by a sound. He opened his eyes and held his breath. It was crying, a muffled, drawn-out childlike cry. At first, Alex thought it was the neighbors. He listened carefully. The crying sounded faint, as if through the wall, but there was something wrong with it. Too even, too monotonous. He got up, walked around the room, looked into the hallway, empty. He peeked into the bathroom. Nothing. The crying stopped. He returned to bed, trying to calm himself. Probably just the house making night noises. He closed his eyes. And then the sound came again. But this time, it was closer. Alex sat up sharply, checked his phone. 3:15 a.m. His heart was pounding. He turned on the lamp beside the bed, but it didn't light up. Silence. The guy sat motionless, staring into the darkness of the room. Something had changed. The shadows in the corner were thicker than before. They were moving. At first, Alex thought it was just his eyes adjusting to the dark, or that the light from the street was casting strange shapes on the walls. But then he realized the shadows weren't just swaying, they were shifting, as if something was standing there. He reached for his phone to turn on the flashlight. The display didn't respond. The screen remained black, cold. The room became much colder, even though the windows were closed. And then Alex felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The crying came again, and this time, it was coming from inside the room. Part 2. The Invisible Guest. Alex froze. His heart was pounding so loudly that he could barely hear his own breath. But the crying didn't go away. The sound was coming from the dark corner of the room where the shadows seemed too thick. Alex felt a chill run down his spine. He took a deep breath and, almost without realizing it, got out of bed. "Who's there?" His voice sounded hoarse. Silence. But he was no longer alone. The air in the room grew heavy, like before a storm. It felt as if something invisible was slowly approaching. Alex felt his fingers tighten around his phone and cursed when he tried to turn on the screen again. It remained dead. Suddenly, something changed. The crying stopped, but the shadows in the corner started to move, slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if someone was standing there, swaying slightly. Alex felt the cold enveloping his body. Thoughts began to swarm in his mind. It's just a dream. It's just a dream. But damn it, everything felt too real. Then the silence exploded with a sound, a knock, sharp and muffled, from behind the wardrobe. Alex jumped. He stared at the wardrobe, unable to move. Something was there. He took a cautious step forward, his breathing turning into short, sharp gasps. The knock came again, this time louder. "Who's there?" he asked, but received no answer. He grabbed the flashlight, shaking hands reaching for it on the nightstand, and pointed the beam of light at the wardrobe. Nothing. Silence. Alex took another step closer and reached for the doors, and then they opened by themselves. For a moment, he just stood there, staring. Inside was only darkness, things hanging on hangers, and something else. He felt it before he saw it. An icy breath on his cheek, and then a faint whisper. The voice was childlike, thin but broken, as if all life had been drained from it. "Will you leave me too?" Alex recoiled, bumping into the table. His breath was ragged. He rushed to the light switch and pressed it. The light flashed, flooding the room. The wardrobe was empty. There were no one there, no traces of anything strange. But Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching him. Part 3. Dark Memories. Alex sat on the bed, staring at the wardrobe. The doors were slightly ajar, and his belongings were visible inside. But the feeling was that someone was hiding in the darkness. He barely slept until morning, and when he woke up, the sun was already shining through the window. All day long, he tried not to think about what had happened during the night, but the thoughts wouldn't go away. What was that? Was it his imagination? A cold breeze? What if it wasn't? He needed answers. The secrets of the building. After lunch, Alex decided to visit his neighbors. Many of the apartments had their doors closed, and no one answered his knocks. Eventually, on the first floor, he spotted an elderly woman slowly sweeping the floor. "Excuse me?" Alex approached her. "Have you lived here long?" The woman raised her head. "And what's it to you, boy?" she asked. "I just moved in. To apartment 44 inches. The woman froze. Her fingers tightened around the broomstick. 44? Yes. She stared at him for a moment, then returned to sweeping the floor. "Eat well, boy, and don't make up nonsense," she said, and without another word she walked away. Alex stood still, watching her leave in surprise. She clearly knew something. But what? The cry in the darkness. That night, Alex tried to sleep, but anxiety wouldn't let him. He tossed and turned, and before he knew it, he had drifted into a light sleep until he heard the sound. At first, it was quiet, small sobbing sounds, as if a child were trying to hold back tears. Alex froze. Again? He slowly opened his eyes. The air was cold, very cold. His breath came out in white puffs, as if it were freezing. And then he heard breathing. Not his own. Someone else's. Someone was in the room. Alex tried to get up, but his body felt heavy, as if it had been paralyzed. He felt movement. The darkness in the corner by the wardrobe seemed thicker, and in it, something was standing, a little child. a thin figure dressed in a dirty, torn dress. Her hair covered her face. Alex felt his heart pound in his chest. He tried to take a deeper breath to make himself move, but it didn't work. The child's body was motionless, and then she slowly lifted her head. Alex saw her eyes, black, bottomless. Then she spoke. "Will you leave me too?" Her voice was quiet, fragile, yet there was something terrifying about it. Alex tried to say something, but his lips wouldn't move. The child tilted her head as if studying him. The light in the room flickered. The child's body twitched, and in a split second she lunged at him. Alex felt something icy touch his neck. The light went out. Darkness engulfed him completely. Part 4. The shadow in the darkness. Cold fingers tightened around his throat. Alex tried to scream, but no sound came from his mouth. The darkness around him thickened, as if the room had drowned in a black fog. He fought, trying to break free, but his body wouldn't obey. Is this the end? The black eyes of the child stared at him. Her pale face twisted with anger or despair. "Don't leave me," she whispered again. Her voice echoed in his head, tearing apart his thoughts. Alex felt the reality around him starting to shift. The walls of the apartment trembled, becoming pale as though worn by time, and the floor was covered in patches of old blood. This wasn't just a ghost. This was something more. Alex gathered all his strength and jerked backward. His fingers found something solid, his flashlight. He quickly pressed the button, and the beam of light pierced the darkness. The child writhed as if in pain. "No!" The light penetrated her body, and it began to dissolve, scattering into shadow. The force that had been holding Alex disappeared. He collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air, while the room returned to its usual appearance. Everything went silent. Only his heavy breathing filled the space. Alex slowly rose, still clutching the flashlight. What was that? He no longer doubted it. There was something supernatural in the apartment, and this thing wasn't going to let him go. The old archive. The next day, Alex decided to seek answers. He went to the city archive to learn more about the apartment. After hours of searching, he finally found something that made his blood run cold. 1987. In apartment 44, a family lived, a mother and her young daughter, Anna. The father had left them before the child was born. One of the nights became Anna's last. The mother, in a state of deep depression, left the girl alone in the apartment for several days. No one knows exactly what happened, but when the neighbors realized a terrible smell was coming from the apartment, it was already too late. The girl was found near the wardrobe, frightened, frozen, dead. As for the mother, she was never seen again. Now everything fell into place. Alex understood that Anna was still here. Her soul couldn't leave this place, because she too had been abandoned, just as he had left her that night in the darkness. He knew, if he didn't help her, she would never let him rest. Part 5. The Final Meeting. Alex returned home clutching an old newspaper clipping. Anna's story wouldn't leave his mind. He no longer feared her. Now he understood that she wasn't just a ghost. She was a lost soul waiting to be found. He entered the apartment, and something immediately changed. The air became heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Alex walked toward the wardrobe. It was open. He didn't know what to do, but something told him he had to speak. "Anna?" he called softly. A few seconds of silence. Then he felt her presence behind him. Slowly, he turned his head. She was standing there, the same little girl who had visited him in the night. Pale, with dark eyes. But this time, she didn't lunge at him or try to harm him. She was just watching. "I know what happened," Alex said, trying not to tremble. "You were waiting for your mother, weren't you?" Anna's eyes shuddered. "She didn't come back," she whispered. There was so much pain in her voice that Alex felt a lump form in his throat. "She didn't abandon you. She was weak. But it's not your fault." The little girl didn't look away. "I don't want to wait anymore." Alex nodded. "You can go now, Anna. She might be waiting for you too." Silence. The girl's eyes softened, and then she began to fade. Her body dissolved into the air, like a shadow dispersing under the sun's rays. "Thank you," a faint voice echoed, and she was gone. Light after the darkness. From that night on, everything changed. Alex no longer heard crying. The darkness in the apartment disappeared, and with it, the chill. He was no longer a stranger here. He was no longer alone. Anna had finally found peace, and so had Alex. The end.